The notice taped to my garage door flapped in the bitter January wind, and I knew before I even ripped it off that my day was about to get significantly worse. $500. The Pinewood Springs Homeowners Association was fining me $500 for storing road salt in my driveway. I stood there in my work boots, still covered in ice melt from the morning job I had just finished, staring at the citation signed by Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, who had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I moved into this Colorado subdivision 3 years ago. The irony was not lost on me. For the past 2 winters, I had been the one keeping the community parking lots safe and drivable, using my own equipment and supplies to salt and sand the icy surfaces that the HOA refused to properly maintain. And now they were fining me for the very materials I used to help them. I crumpled the notice in my fist and walked into my house, slamming the door harder than necessary. My landscaping and snow removal business, Kingston Property Services, had been thriving in the Denver suburbs, and I had specifically chosen this house in Pinewood Springs for its oversized lot that gave me space to store equipment and supplies. The HOA bylaws I signed mentioned nothing about road salt storage. I had checked multiple times. My phone rang as I poured myself coffee that had gone cold hours ago. It was my business partner, Rico. "Hey man, we need to restock before the next storm hits tomorrow." "That means another pallet of salt." "We have a problem," I said and explained the situation. Rico let out a low whistle. $500. For what exactly?" "The notice says unsightly storage of commercial materials in violation of aesthetic standards. It is complete garbage." "Can they even do that?" "I am about to find out." I pulled out the thick folder containing all my HOA documents and started reading. 2 hours later, my coffee was even colder, and I had found exactly what I was looking for. Or rather, what I was not looking for. There was no specific prohibition against storing road salt. The aesthetic standards clause was vague enough to be interpreted a dozen different ways, but it specifically mentioned visible trash, inoperable vehicles, and lawn decorations left up beyond holiday periods. My neatly stacked bags of road salt in my driveway, clearly labeled and organized, did not fit any of those categories. The next morning, I showed up at Patricia Henderson's door at 9 a.m. sharp. She lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a sprawling 2-story with a manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than most people's car payments. She answered the door in yoga pants and a fleece vest, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that probably took 20 minutes to make look effortlessly casual. "Derek," she said, not bothering to hide her annoyance, "this is unexpected. We need to talk about this fine." The notice was very clear. "You are in violation of our community standards. Show me where in the bylaws it says I cannot store road salt." Patricia crossed her arms. "Section 7, subsection C, aesthetic standards. Your driveway looks like a commercial warehouse. It says nothing about road salt. Nothing about landscaping supplies." I checked. The HOA board has the right to interpret the bylaws as we see fit to maintain property values. So you just decided one day that my property looks bad. Multiple neighbors have complained. Who? Patricia smiled tightly. "Complaint records are confidential. This is insane. I have been helping this community for 2 years. Those parking lots you all use, I am the one making them safe. No one asked you to do that." The words hung in the air between us. I felt something shift in that moment, a decision crystallizing. "You are absolutely right," I said slowly. "No one asked me to do that. Consider it done." I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving Patricia standing in her doorway looking confused. The next call I made was to a lawyer. Jennifer Ortega had handled some contract work for my business before, and she agreed to look over my HOA documents that afternoon. Her office was in downtown Denver, a modest suite that smelled like coffee and old books. "This is interesting," she said after reviewing everything. "The fine is questionable at best. The aesthetic clause is vague, but your storage appears reasonable for a home-based business owner. We could fight it." "What would that cost me?" "More than $500, honestly. These HOA disputes drag out, but here is what is really interesting." She tapped a section of the documents. "The HOA has a duty to maintain common areas, including parking lots, to reasonable safety standards. They have been neglecting that duty, and if someone gets hurt, they could be liable. I have been covering for them." "Exactly. And now you are going to stop." I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. "Now I am going to stop." The storm hit that night, dumping 8 inches of heavy, wet snow across the Denver metro area. By morning, temperatures had dropped, and everything had frozen into a treacherous sheet of ice. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from regular clients. I spent the day working my contracted properties, making good money, and staying far away from Pinewood Springs. By that evening, my personal phone was lighting up with texts from neighbors. The main parking lot, which served the community clubhouse and pool area, was a skating rink. The guest parking area near the mailboxes was no better. 3 cars had slid into each other trying to navigate the ice. No one was hurt, but people were angry. I did not respond to any of the messages. The next morning, Patricia called me directly. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. This time I answered. "Derek, we need your help with the parking lots." "I am sorry, but as you said, no one asked me to maintain those areas. People cannot access the clubhouse. The mail. This is becoming a safety issue." "That sounds like something the HOA should handle. You collect dues for common area maintenance, right?" There was a long pause. "We have a contract with a company, but they are backed up because of the storm." "Then I guess you will have to wait your turn like everyone else." "Derek, please. I know we got off on the wrong foot with that fine. That fine stands, right?" $500 for storing the exact materials that would solve your current problem." Another pause. "The board would need to meet to discuss reversing it. Let me know when that happens. Until then, I have paying customers to attend to." I hung up, and it felt good. Over the next week, temperatures stayed below freezing, and new snow kept falling. The Pinewood Springs parking lots became neighborhood legend for all the wrong reasons. A woman fell and sprained her wrist. An elderly man nearly broke his hip. The community Facebook page exploded with complaints, and every single one of them tagged Patricia and the other board members. I watched from the sidelines, continuing to take care of my regular clients while my own driveway and the street in front of my house remained perfectly clear and safe. Other neighbors started asking if I could do their driveways. I gave them my business rate, and several took me up on it. Funny how they had no problem with my road salt storage when they needed it. The HOA called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday evening. I received an email notification, as did all residents. The agenda was vague, mentioning winter maintenance and community safety. I almost did not go, but Jennifer advised me to attend. "Document everything," she said. "If they try to retaliate further, you will want a record of what was said." The clubhouse meeting room was packed, and the energy was tense. People stamped snow off their boots and complained about the icy walk from the parking lot. Patricia sat at the head table with the other board members. Michael Chen, the vice president, and Susan Whitmore, the treasurer. All 3 looked uncomfortable. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared statement about the challenges of winter maintenance and the limitations of their contracted service provider. People were not having it. Why are the lots not being maintained? Someone shouted. We pay dues for this, another voice added. Someone is going to get seriously hurt. Patricia held up her hands. We are working on solutions. The contractor has promised to prioritize our community. That is what you said last week. I sat in the back, saying nothing. Several people had noticed me and were whispering. Finally, someone said what everyone was thinking. Derek takes care of the lots. He has for 2 years. Why is he not doing it now? All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly. The HOA fined me $500 for storing road salt. Patricia told me no one asked me to maintain the parking lots. She was right, so I stopped. The room erupted. People were yelling at Patricia, at the board, at each other. It took several minutes to restore order. The fine was for legitimate code violations, Patricia said, her voice strained. Derek, if you would be willing to properly store your materials, I already properly store my materials. I have photos documenting exactly how the salt is stored. It is neat, organized, and clearly labeled. There is no code violation. You made one up because you do not like that I run a business from my home. Jennifer had suggested I bring printed photos, and I pulled them out now, passing them around. They showed my driveway with neatly stacked bags of road salt, organized against the garage wall, taking up minimal space. This is what you fined him for? Someone asked incredulously. The aesthetic standards are subjective, Patricia said, but her confidence was cracking. You know what else is subjective? I said. Whether someone wants to help their community for free. I have spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars worth of materials making those parking lots safe. I never asked for anything in return. But now you have made it clear that my help is not wanted and that my business is not welcome here. So I am done. If you want those lots maintained, hire someone. Pay them. That is what HOA dues are supposed to cover anyway. I walked out before anyone could respond, but I could hear the chaos continuing behind me. My phone started buzzing before I even made it to my truck. Texts from neighbors, mostly supportive, some asking if I would reconsider. I ignored them all and drove home. The next morning I found 2 more notices on my door. The first was a formal appeal form for the fine, with a hearing scheduled for the following month. The second was a cease and desist letter demanding I stop conducting business operations from my residential property. I photographed both and sent them to Jennifer. She called me within an hour. They are escalating. This cease and desist is completely unenforceable. You are not violating any zoning laws, and the HOA cannot prohibit you from running a home-based business unless it creates a specific nuisance. Storing supplies is not a nuisance. So what do? We respond formally, denying all allegations, and we document every interaction from here on out. And Derek, stop helping them with anything. Not the parking lots, not neighbor driveways at a discount, nothing. They want to play hardball, we play hardball. Some of my neighbors are not the problem. They have been supportive. I understand, but you need to create clear boundaries. Charge your full rate for everything. Be professional but distant. Right now, the HOA sees you as someone they can push around. We need to change that perception. The weather got worse before it got better. A major storm system moved through Colorado, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the Front Range. I worked 70-hour weeks taking care of my contracted clients, and the money was excellent. Meanwhile, Pinewood Springs descended into winter chaos. The parking lots became impassable. The HOA's contracted company finally showed up but did a poor job, pushing snow into piles that blocked parking spaces and leaving large patches of ice untreated. More people fell. More cars were damaged. The community Facebook page became a war zone, with residents demanding board resignations and threatening lawsuits. Through all of it, my property remained immaculate. I maintained my driveway, my sidewalks, and the street frontage with professional precision. It became a stark visual contrast to the disaster surrounding it. People drove by slowly, taking pictures. Some posted them online with captions about HOA incompetence. Patricia tried to spin it as me being selfish, but that backfired spectacularly when someone dug up records showing that I had been maintaining the parking lots for free for 2 years. The narrative shifted from me being difficult to the HOA board being petty and vindictive. Several board members started receiving calls for their resignation. I might have felt bad if they had not tried to fine me again. The second fine arrived in February, this time for $300, claiming my work truck was a commercial vehicle parked in violation of residential parking standards. Never mind that the bylaws specifically allowed trucks, or that my neighbor 2 doors down had a plumbing company truck that had been parked in his driveway for 5 years. That fine broke something. Not in me, but in the community. A petition started circulating demanding the board's recall. Jennifer helped me file a formal lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and selective enforcement. The local news picked up the story after someone tipped them off, and suddenly, I was doing interviews about HOA overreach and community safety. The reporter, a sharp woman named Amanda Cross from 9 News, interviewed me in my driveway, making sure to get footage of my neatly stored supplies and well-maintained property. Then she went to the parking lots and filmed the icy disaster. The segment aired during the evening news, and it went viral locally. This is Derek Kingston, a small business owner who has been maintaining his HOA's parking lots for free for 2 years, Amanda reported, standing in front of my house. Now the HOA is fining him for storing the very materials he used to keep their common areas safe. The result? A community in crisis, with multiple injuries and thousands of dollars in vehicle damage, all because the HOA board decided to pick a fight with the one person willing to help them. The segment showed Patricia declining to comment, her door closing firmly in Amanda's face. It showed the parking lot chaos, interviewed residents who had fallen or damaged their cars, and ended with a shot of my pristine driveway and the ridiculous fine notices. My phone exploded. News outlets wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted to represent me pro bono. HOA reform advocates wanted me to speak at their events. It was overwhelming, but also vindicating. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for early March, and this time the agenda included a vote on the board recall petition. Jennifer advised me to attend but say nothing unless directly addressed. "Let them implode on their own," she said. "Your lawsuit is solid, the public opinion is in your favor, and the board is panicking. Just watch." The meeting room was so packed that people stood along the walls. Several residents I had never seen at a meeting before showed up. The energy was angry and expectant. Patricia looked like she had not slept in days, and the other board members looked ready to bolt. Before Patricia could even call the meeting to order, a man I recognized as living near the clubhouse stood up. "I am Frank Morrison, and I am submitting a formal complaint to the Colorado HOA Regulatory Board about this organization's failure to maintain safe common areas. My wife broke her wrist on the ice in February, and our insurance company is pursuing subrogation against the HOA for medical costs. This board has been negligent, and they have harassed the one person who was compensating for their negligence." A woman stood next. "I am Linda Vasquez, and I represent a group of 12 homeowners who are also pursuing legal action for injuries and vehicle damage. We have retained counsel and will be filing suit by the end of the month. Patricia looked like she might be sick. Please, everyone, let us address this calmly. We acknowledge there have been challenges this winter, challenges you created, someone shouted. The fine against Derek Kingston was a mistake, Michael Chen suddenly said, speaking for the first time. Patricia whipped around to stare at him. I am formally proposing we rescind all fines issued to him, issue a written apology, and compensate him for his past volunteer work maintaining our parking lots. Second, Susan Whitmore said immediately. Patricia's face went bright red. We have not discussed this. We are discussing it now, Michael said firmly. I am tired of the legal threats, the bad press, and the fact that we are going to be personally liable when these lawsuits start hitting. Derek was helping us and we attacked him for it. This ends now. The vote was 2-1 with only Patricia opposing. The room applauded. Patricia stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out without another word. Michael took over the meeting and the remaining agenda moved quickly. The board voted to hire a proper winter maintenance company, increase the emergency fund allocation, and begin the process of revising the aesthetic standards clause to be more specific and less subject to interpretation. They also voted to formally apologize to me and offer $1,000 compensation for my 2 years of volunteer work. I declined the money. Use it for better parking lot maintenance, I said. That is what matters. After the meeting, several neighbors approached to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Some admitted they had been afraid of Patricia retaliating against them. Others just had not realized how serious the situation was until the injuries started piling up. You did the right thing, Frank Morrison told me, shaking my hand. Sometimes you have to let people face the consequences of their own actions. Patricia needed to learn she cannot just bully people. The lawsuit against Patricia and the HOA board for harassment took several more months to resolve. Jennifer negotiated a settlement that included all my legal fees, formal written apologies, and a permanent injunction against selective enforcement of HOA rules. The existing fines were not just rescinded, but expunged from all records. Patricia resigned from the board in April. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she and her husband were planning to move. The new board president was Michael Chen, who proved to be reasonable and focused on actual community issues rather than petty power plays. The cease and desist against my business operations quietly disappeared. No one mentioned it again, and I continued running Kingston Property Services from my property without any further interference. In fact, the new board even asked if they could hire me formally to maintain the parking lots for the following winter. I gave them a fair quote they accepted, and we signed a proper contract with clear terms and payment schedules. The local news followed up on the story in May, showing the improved parking lot maintenance and interviewing satisfied residents. Amanda Cross caught me heading out to a job one morning. "How does it feel to have one?" she asked, microphone in hand. "I did not win," I said, loading equipment into my truck. "The community won. They got a board that actually cares about safety and proper maintenance. That is what matters. Any advice for people dealing with difficult HOAs? Document everything. Know your rights. And do not be afraid to stop doing favors for people who do not appreciate them. Sometimes the best way to make someone understand your value is to let them see what life is like without you." The segment ended with a shot of the well-maintained parking lots and a voiceover about HOA reform efforts gaining momentum across Colorado. I got calls from several other communities asking for quotes on winter maintenance. Business was good. But the best moment came in June at the community summer barbecue. The new board had organized it as a way to rebuild community spirit and move past the winter drama. I almost did not go, but Rico convinced me it would be good to show there were no hard feelings. People approached me throughout the evening, thanking me, apologizing, or just making normal conversation about lawns and weather and kids. It felt like a regular neighborhood gathering should feel, without the undercurrent of tension that had defined things when Patricia was in charge. Near the end of the evening, Michael Chen clinked a glass and made a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the leadership transition. Then he presented me with a plaque. "For Derek Kingston," he read aloud, "in recognition of 2 years of volunteer service maintaining community safety. Your dedication, even when unappreciated, exemplifies the best of what a neighbor can be." People applauded, and I felt my face get hot. I was not used to public recognition, and I definitely was not comfortable being the center of attention. But as I held that plaque and looked around at my neighbors, actual friendly faces smiling back at me, I realized this was what community was supposed to be. Not rules for the sake of rules or power for the sake of power, but people taking care of each other and solving problems together. I kept the plaque in my office, right next to my business license and contractor certifications. Clients would sometimes ask about it, and I would tell them the story. Most found it amusing or infuriating or both. Several said it made them trust me more, knowing I stood up for myself and did not let anyone push me around. The next winter was completely different. I had a formal contract with the HOA, clear expectations, and fair payment. The parking lots were maintained properly and promptly. No one got hurt. No cars were damaged. The community Facebook page stayed blissfully drama-free, mostly full of people sharing photos of their dogs and asking for restaurant recommendations. Patricia's house sold in September to a young family with 3 kids who immediately became beloved in the neighborhood for their enthusiastic participation in community events. I saw Patricia once during her move out, directing the moving truck from her driveway. We made eye contact briefly and she looked away. I felt no need to approach her. Some people never learn, and that was not my problem to solve. Jennifer and I stayed in touch, and she referred several other HOA dispute cases to me as a consultant. It turned out my experience was valuable to people trying to navigate similar situations. I helped several homeowners successfully fight questionable fines and arbitrary rule enforcement. Some situations settled quietly. Others required more dramatic interventions, like mine had. One case in particular stood out. A veteran in Aurora was being fined for having a flagpole in his yard that the HOA deemed too tall. The bylaws said nothing about flagpole height, but the board president, a woman named Sharon who reminded me uncomfortably of Patricia, had decided it was an aesthetic violation. I helped him document everything, connected him with Jennifer, and testified at the hearing about selective enforcement patterns. He won. The board had to revise their bylaws to comply with the Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, and Sharon resigned shortly after. My business continued to grow. I hired 2 full-time employees and added spring and fall cleanup services to complement the winter snow removal and summer landscaping work. Kingston Property Services became known as a reliable company that did quality work and did not back down from bullies. That reputation helped more than any advertising ever could. Rico eventually became a full partner in the business, and we opened a second office to handle commercial properties. The residential HOA contracts remained our bread and butter through the winters, and we developed a reputation for excellent communication and reliability. Boards started seeking us out, which was a nice change from the early days of hustling for every contract. I got invited to speak at a Colorado HOA management conference in Denver about community relations and contractor partnerships. Standing in front of a room full of board members and property managers felt surreal, but I told my story honestly. I talked about the importance of clear communication, fair enforcement of rules, and recognizing when residents are genuinely trying to help their communities. Your contractors and volunteers are not your enemies, I said to close my presentation. They are your partners in maintaining property values and community safety. Treat them with respect, follow your own bylaws consistently, and remember that your job is to serve the community, not control it. When you forget that, you end up with icy parking lots, angry residents, and news cameras on your doorstep. The applause was polite but thoughtful. Afterward, several board members approached me privately to discuss their own challenges. Some were dealing with difficult residents who refused to follow any rules. Others were trying to reform boards that had become too aggressive or punitive. I listened and offered what advice I could, always emphasizing documentation, consistency, and common sense. One conversation stood out. A woman named Margaret, a board treasurer from a community in Thornton, told me about their vindictive president who was fining people for trivial violations while ignoring serious maintenance issues. "How did you get your community to finally take action?" she asked. "Because we are heading down the same path you went through." Honestly, I stopped enabling the dysfunction. As long as I was fixing their problems for free, they had no incentive to change. When I stepped back and let them face the natural consequences of their decisions, people got angry enough to demand reform. But it was not fun and people got hurt. If your board will listen to reason, try that first. Show them the math on lawsuit liability. Get insurance involved. Sometimes financial reality is more convincing than moral arguments. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. And if they will not listen to reason, then you document everything, lawyer up if necessary, and let them fail. It is harsh, but some people only learn through consequences. 6 months later, Margaret emailed me to say their board president had been successfully recalled after the insurance company threatened to drop coverage due to maintenance negligence. The new board was implementing proper procedures and treating residents fairly. She thanked me for the advice and the encouragement to take action. Stories like that made everything worthwhile. What started as a frustrating personal battle with an unreasonable HOA president had somehow turned into a larger mission of helping people navigate these complicated community dynamics. I never set out to become an HOA reform advocate, but life takes you in unexpected directions. Back in Pinewood Springs, things settled into a comfortable normal. Michael Chen served 2 years as board president before stepping down to let someone else take a turn. The rotating leadership kept any one person from accumulating too much power or developing a Patricia-style complex. The community implemented a formal complaint review process to prevent arbitrary fines, and residents were encouraged to attend meetings and participate in decision-making. My contract with the HOA renewed each year without incident. I submitted invoices, they paid promptly, and the parking lot stayed safe all winter. It was boring and professional and exactly how it should have been from the beginning. I still stored road salt in my driveway. The bags were neatly stacked against my garage wall, clearly labeled, taking up minimal space. No one ever complained again. In fact, several neighbors started asking me where I sourced it so they could keep their own supplies on hand. I gave them my supplier's information and tips on proper storage. Community knowledge sharing instead of petty enforcement. What a concept. 5 years after the initial fine that started everything, I received an invitation to speak at my community's annual meeting. They wanted me to present on winter safety and preparedness, given my expertise. I accepted, putting together a simple presentation with photos and practical tips for homeowners. The meeting room was maybe a third full, which was normal for non-crisis meetings. I recognized most of the faces, though there were several newer residents I had not met yet. The current board president, a retired teacher named Dorothy, introduced me warmly. Derek has been maintaining our parking lots for 3 years now under contract, but many of you may not know he was doing it as a volunteer for 2 years before that. He is also a great neighbor and community member, and we are lucky to have him here in Pinewood Springs. I talked for about 20 minutes about winter preparation, showed some photos of equipment and supplies, and answered questions about everything from the best salt to when to call professionals versus doing it yourself. It was casual and informative, and people seemed genuinely interested. Afterward, a young couple who had just moved in approached me. "We heard there was some drama a few years back about HOA fines," the husband asked. "Something that ended up on the news," I laughed. "Yeah, that was a whole thing. The previous board president decided she did not like me storing road salt, fined me for it, so I stopped maintaining the parking lots for free. Things got messy before they got better." "That seems insane," the wife said. "Your supplies are so neat. We have seen them when we drive by." Why would anyone care? Some people care more about control than common sense, but the community sorted it out eventually. That is the important part. They nodded, and we chatted a bit more about the neighborhood before they headed home. I stayed to help Dorothy stack chairs and turn off lights. "You have come a long way," she said as we worked. "I remember when you first moved in. Quiet, kept to yourself, just trying to run your business and help out when you could. Patricia forced me to find my voice. She did, but you chose to use it constructively. A lot of people would have just moved away or stayed angry. You stayed and helped make things better. That matters." I thought about that on the drive home. Dorothy was right. I could have moved, could have found another neighborhood without HOA drama, but this was my home, my community. I had invested in it, literally and figuratively. Walking away would have meant letting Patricia win, letting dysfunction define the neighborhood, and abandoning neighbors who deserved better. By standing my ground, documenting everything and refusing to enable bad behavior, I had helped create real change, not just for myself, but for everyone in Pinewood Springs. The improved safety procedures, the reformed enforcement policies, the more engaged and reasonable board leadership, all of that came from people demanding better after seeing how bad things could get. My driveway looked the same as it always had. Neat rows of road salt bags against the garage wall, work truck parked to the side, equipment organized and maintained. But what that driveway represented had completely changed. It was no longer evidence of an aesthetic violation in Patricia's eyes. It was the workspace of a professional who took pride in his business and his community contributions. It was a symbol of standing up for yourself when authorities overreach. It was proof that sometimes doing the right thing means letting people face the consequences of their own bad decisions. The next winter brought heavy snow again, and I was ready. Kingston Property Services had expanded to handling 15 HOA contracts across the Denver metro area, plus dozens of commercial properties and individual residential clients. We had invested in new equipment, hired seasonal staff, and developed efficient routing systems. My original contract with Pinewood Springs was now one of my smallest jobs, but it remained my favorite because of what it represented. I took care of those parking lots with the same attention and pride I had when I was doing it for free, maybe more so, because now there was formal recognition of the work's value. Every time I spread salt on those lots, I thought about Patricia's snide comment that no one had asked me to do it. She was right, technically, but she missed the point entirely. Community is not about waiting to be asked. It is about seeing a need and stepping up, about taking care of each other, about making your little corner of the world a bit better. Of course, it is also about getting paid fairly for your work and not letting anyone take advantage of your generosity. Both things can be true. One afternoon in December, I was finishing up the main parking lot when a car pulled up. A woman in her 50s got out, someone I did not recognize. She approached cautiously. "Are you Derek Kingston?" "I am. I am Karen Foster. I live over in Cedar Ridge, the development next to Pinewood Springs. Our HOA president saw your work here and got your information, but I wanted to talk to you personally before our board reaches out." I leaned against my truck. "Okay, what can I do for you? We are having issues similar to what you went through here. Our board president is fining people for arbitrary violations, ignoring actual maintenance problems, and creating a hostile environment. Several residents want to hire you for winter maintenance as a way to pressure the board to do better. Would you be interested in taking on individual driveway contracts in our community?" I considered this. It was a clever strategy. Getting multiple homeowners to hire me individually would visually demonstrate the board's failure to maintain common areas while solving the immediate safety problem for those residents. But it was also potentially walking into another political mess. "What is the board president's name?" I asked. "Brenda Taylor. Do you know her?" "No, but I have learned that these situations follow patterns. Let me ask you something. Have you tried working with Brenda directly, attending meetings, proposing solutions, giving her a chance to improve?" Karen nodded. "Multiple times. She shuts down any criticism and threatens people with fines if they push back. It is like she wants to be a dictator instead of a community representative." "Has anyone filed formal complaints, contacted a lawyer, documented the harassment?" "We are starting to. A few people have documentation, but most are just frustrated and venting on Facebook." I pulled out a business card and wrote Jennifer Ortega's name and number on the back. "Here is my lawyer. She specializes in HOA disputes. Get your documentation together, have a few residents call her, and see what your legal options are. If you want to hire me for individual driveways, I can do that, but it is not going to solve your underlying problem. You need board reform, and that requires legal pressure and community organizing." Karen took the card, looking thoughtful. "You have been through this. What would you do in our situation?" Exactly what I did in mine. Stop enabling the dysfunction. If Brenda is not maintaining common areas, stop covering for her. Let the problems become visible. Document everything. Build a coalition of affected residents. File formal complaints. Get legal advice. And when you have enough support, recall the board and elect people who will actually serve the community. It is not fast and it is not fun, but it works. And if we hire you in the meantime, then you get safe driveways, I get paid work, and Brenda gets a visible reminder that her residents are solving problems she should be handling. But do not expect me to fight your battles for you. I will maintain properties I am contracted to maintain. The political reform has to come from residents." Karen smiled. "That is fair. Thank you for the advice and the referral. I will pass this along to our group." She drove away and I finished up the parking lot. I wondered if I would hear from Cedar Ridge again. Either they would take my advice and start organizing properly, or they would keep complaining on Facebook until something forced change. Either way, it was their community to save or lose. That evening, Rico and I were reviewing the schedule for the following week when he asked about the conversation with Karen. "Another HOA mess," he said. "Sounds like it. I gave her Jennifer's information and some advice. We will see if they actually do anything with it." "You have become the neighborhood HOA whisperer," I laughed. "Not by choice, but I guess if my experience helps other people avoid what I went through, that is worth something. Just make sure you are getting paid properly. You already did the volunteer thing once." Trust me, I learned that lesson. 3 months later, Karen emailed me to say Cedar Ridge had successfully recalled their board president after building a solid case of negligent maintenance and discriminatory fine enforcement. Jennifer had represented several residents in formal complaints to the state regulatory board, and the pressure had worked. Karen herself had been elected to the new board and wanted to discuss a winter maintenance contract for the following year. I sent her a quote. She accepted, and Kingston Property Services added another HOA to our client list. When I showed up for the first walkthrough of their property, several residents came out to thank me for the advice I had given Karen. Apparently, my suggestion to stop enabling dysfunction and let problems become visible had been exactly the catalyst they needed to organize effectively. "You could have just taken our money for individual driveways," one man said, "but you gave us the tools to fix the real problem instead." That says a lot about your character. I appreciated the sentiment, but mostly I was just glad they had figured it out. Every community that reformed its HOA board was one less Patricia Henderson making people miserable over petty power plays. That made the world a slightly better place, and I was happy to contribute to that in whatever small way I could. Back in Pinewood Springs, life continued peacefully. The neighborhood kids grew up, I got older, the trees got bigger, and the parking lots stayed safe every winter. My business thrived, expanding into spring and summer services that kept us busy year-round. I bought a bigger house eventually, one with even more space for equipment storage, and sold my Pinewood Springs property to a young couple starting their own service business. I gave them all my advice about dealing with HOAs, and they listened carefully. The last time I drove through Pinewood Springs was about 8 years after the original fine incident. I was in the area for another job and decided to swing by out of curiosity. The community looked good. The parking lots were clean and well-maintained. The clubhouse had been repainted. The landscaping was mature and attractive. It looked like a place where people actually wanted to live, not a place defined by petty rules and hostile enforcement. I did not stop, just drove through slowly, remembering. That house where I spent 3 years building a business and fighting for principle. That driveway where Patricia had decided my neat stacks of road salt were an unacceptable eyesore. Those parking lots where I had spent countless hours ensuring safety, first for free and then for fair payment. That clubhouse, where dramatic meetings had unfolded and community members had finally demanded better leadership. So much had changed because I chose to stand my ground over a $500 fine that should never have been issued. I did not set out to reform an HOA or become an advocate for homeowners' rights. I just wanted to run my business and be a good neighbor. But when pushed, I pushed back, and that made all the difference. The final lesson I took from the whole experience was simple but profound. Communities are only as healthy as their members demand them to be. Bad leaders thrive when good people stay silent or work around problems instead of addressing them directly. Change requires courage, persistence, and willingness to endure temporary discomfort for long-term improvement. I was proud of what happened in Pinewood Springs, not because I won some petty dispute with Patricia, but because the community came together and demanded better. They recognized dysfunction, organized effectively, and implemented real reforms. That is how democracy is supposed to work, even at the small scale of a homeowners association. My story ended up helping dozens of other communities facing similar issues. Some people reached out directly for advice. Others just heard the story and found inspiration to take action in their own situations. Jennifer continued to successfully litigate HOA overreach cases, often citing my case as precedent. Local and state legislators started taking HOA reform more seriously, proposing new regulations to prevent the kind of arbitrary enforcement I experienced. None of that would have happened if I had just paid the $500 fine and moved on. Sometimes the fights you do not want to fight turn out to be the most important ones. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who comes after you. And sometimes the best way to help people is to stop helping them so they learn to help themselves. I never forgot those lessons. They shaped how I ran my business, how I dealt with clients, and how I thought about community involvement. Fair payment for fair work. Clear contracts and expectations. Treating people with respect and demanding respect in return. Not enabling dysfunction or making excuses for bad behavior. These principles served me well for decades. Looking back now, I can honestly say I am grateful for that ridiculous $500 fine. It forced me to find my voice, stand up for my rights, and help create meaningful change in my community. It taught me that principle matters more than convenience, and that sometimes the right path is the difficult one. It connected me with people like Jennifer who became lifelong friends and colleagues, and it gave me a story worth telling, one that helped others facing similar challenges. Patricia Henderson probably never learned those lessons. Some people never do, but that was not my problem to solve. I did my part by refusing to accept her arbitrary authority and by helping my community find better leadership. What she did with her life after leaving Pinewood Springs was up to her. As for me, I kept storing road salt in my driveway, kept maintaining parking lots through long winters, and kept building a business I could be proud of. The bags were always neatly stacked, clearly labeled, and organized efficiently. Not because some HOA rule said they had to be, but because that was the professional standard I set for myself, and no one ever fined me for it again.